Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and if you would like to keep up with all things Clown Decade, do of course subscribe to the channel and become a member. Now, we're doing a good old-fashioned reaction video here, the main reason because Novara is still up to their old tricks despite the fact that they have a whole new range of presenters, some of who, to be fair, are kind of like me in that they used to just sit in their bedroom and talk to a PC about their opinions and have ended up being picked up by Novara Media. So I would say good for Helena here, who is presenting a video called Supermarket Giant Will Pay You to Snitch on Shoplifters. I'm very much in favour of the supermarket paying me to snitch on shoplifters, one because I get some money for it, and two because it will help keep the prices down in that they will have to pay less for their security detail, which of course is incorporated into the price of everything you pay for at these shops. It's not just inflation that's making these prices go up, it's also the fact that they have to pay more for the staff there, with the national insurance contribution going up, minimum wage going up. Obviously they are big factors in it. Energy prices are also a big thing, but security, or loss prevention I think they call it these days, absolutely huge, and is obviously done because it would, cost them even more if everyone was just stealing all the time. Anyway, you get the idea. Let's do a good old-fashioned react video and see what Helena here has to say.
Shoplifting is becoming an increasingly visible crime in our cities and in our towns.
Already, it's interesting that she's using the term increasingly visible rather than just statement of fact. It is increasing. In fact, just take a look at the Home Office statistics. It's literally, well, we don't know if it's reaching a peak. It could go above 500,000 cases of it. But usually when there's language like this right at the start of the video, it's an attempt to effectively gaslight you into just, oh, you're seeing it more because of right-wing grifters. It's not actually happening. Well, here's ONS statistic, Home Office statistics actually, showing you that actually while you had a pretty level amount of shoplifting in the 2000s to 2010s, come to the 2020s, it raises like nothing else. Actually, that's not quite true. It's raising like illegal migrants popping over as well.
Whether it's the major supermarkets or local shops, pharmacies or the nation's beloved Greggs, every kind of retailer has felt the impact of a more brazen approach to stealing.
So you start off by saying it's more visible and then just have to come out and straight away admit, okay, it is actually happening. Basically every shop is saying it's an epidemic.
And it's not just an impression exaggerated by online bots and right-wing culture warriors. The stats back it up too.
No, interesting. I take it back. They're admitting that it's an actual problem. No attempt at gaslighting. Maybe I am wrong to be so cynical about Novara Media these days. Maybe Haryan Bastani is actually trickling down his post-liberalism, okay, maybe the right-wingers have a point, to the rest of his team. Because I've not noticed that happening over the past couple of years where Haryan Bastani's gone down that route, but it really seems like it's affected the whole of Novara. Which really begs the question, what's the point of them? Because right-wingers explain all this better anyway, and actually have solutions.
The year to March 2025 saw the highest level of shoplifting recorded by police in England and Wales since 2003.
Damn, we're even using the same graph. This is classic Haryanism. Always ahead of the curve.
The problem is real, but the solution, as well as the causes, are unclear.
Well, the main cause, in my mind, is pretty obvious. They're going to go on about austerity, but they're going to explain it wrong. Oh, police units and forces cut funding. Yeah, that's kind of true, but that's because it all went to the NHS, but they don't particularly want to say, oh, it all went to the NHS and that was bad, because the NHS is the state religion of socialists. So you strip back a police force, on top of that the limited resources they do have, a lot of it is spent on sending 6 officers to arrest 2 people for having a go at their school, or their children's school I should say. It's spent on elite police squads who are going to be scrolling through Twitter to find anti-migrant sentiment. Basically, the police have been stripped back a bit, that is true. You can blame that on austerity, but again I struggle to call it austerity because we still ended up in a deficit. On top of that, real-term spending only went down in 2013, it stayed pretty much level throughout the rest of the time. And when it did go down in 2013, it was by a couple of billion. On top of that, to help out with the limited resources that the police have, the Tories effectively brought in a new policy that said, okay, if it's £250 worth or below of goods stolen, just don't turn up. There's more important things to do. What that's ended up doing is making shoplifting of goods valued at less than £250 in total is de facto not illegal, it's de facto legal. And so this is why you're seeing a whole load of petty shoplifting, and this is why now in the hotspots you're seeing GPSs on stakes and you are seeing alcohol locked behind a coded door. I swear to God, if they start going on about how it's exclusively austerity, I'm going to lose my mind. It did have an effect on it, don't get me wrong, but it's the type of austerity that you'd want because it put all the money and siphoned it into the NHS. But of course, they'll completely ignore that, and on top of that, it's so that the police can actually police the damn things that these people were screaming for back in the woke days where they wanted people arrested for mean tweets. Let's be real.
Supermarket giant Iceland has announced that it will pay customers £1 each time they report a shoplifter in its stores, after it was revealed that the chain is losing around £20 million annually from the shoplifting crime.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it's worth it. Again, my experience when it came to shoplifting when I worked there, it was, I don't know, there were about 5 infamous people that we basically had to ban from the shop, but 2 of them were kids from the school down the road, by the way, because they'd be repeat offenders. And our head of loss prevention, obviously he'd be on the CCTV, he'd see them all the time, and effectively it just turned into, right, ban these people from the store because they're repeat offenders, and that's what happened. So you pay someone to help you out with that, you probably end up saving a load of money, because the type of things that they would steal, with the kids obviously it was sweets that they just didn't have money for. In fact, I don't even think that's true, because every time they take money out and say, oh, okay, I'd pay for it, so that's not even true. If it was adults, they'd steal alcohol, baby food, and steaks, obviously, to take away and obviously sell at a discounted price to a pub in the next town over. And then there was the time we got robbed of the ATM machine, and the ATM leasing company didn't replace it because it got robbed about 3 times. So yeah, I really don't have a problem with this. In fact, it makes perfect sense for Iceland to, well, at least pilot this, see if it works.
Government ministers have also been encouraging the public to report cases. This was Policing Minister Diana Johnson on BBC Breakfast earlier this week.
Clearly, I want people who see shoplifting to report it.
Okay, that seems fine so far. Let's just get to the relevant bits, though.
But it is unacceptable, and that's why we're clamping down in the crime and policing bill, getting rid of what the previous government introduced, which was this idea that if you stole less than £200, nothing would happen to you. You wouldn't actually face, the consequences of your crime.
Yeah, seems reasonable. I thought it was £250. Turns out it's 200. Doesn't really matter. When people steal things, they usually only take what they can put in a shopping basket. And usually, again, from my experience, if there's a very expensive, let's say, bottle of alcohol, over £100 worth, they just put the case out with no bottle in, for obvious reasons. So it's actually quite difficult to rob £200 worth of, well, goods from a shop, especially a supermarket.
Now, what Johnson says there isn't quite true. The so-called £200 rule is from the 2014 Anti-Social Behaviour Crime and Policing Act, a Tory Lib Dem coalition law, and it doesn't say the police shouldn't investigate what it calls low-value shoplifting. Rather, it says that that kind of shoplifting should be dealt with summarily, which means by a magistrate's court which can only impose prison sentences of up to 6 months and fines.
Again, there's a difference between de jure and de facto. De jure is what's written down, de facto is what actually happens in reality, and what happens in reality is that, I mean, when's the last time we've heard of anyone being done for shoplifting of under £200? Okay, that's not exactly newsworthy, but with everyone basically saying, oh, when people shoplift, the police just don't turn up, well, there we go. They're supposed to go to magistrates' court and all that, but it kind of doesn't matter. It is right of this Labour government to make a change to that law, because quite clearly it is allowed for complicity within pretty much every police force to not deal with shoplifting properly, and it's become an endemic. In fact, take a quick look at the graph again and you'll notice that it was a 2014 law, and it takes only 2 years for that law to take a real world effect, where shoplifting starts to peak, and then obviously we hit the pandemic, it goes right down, and now it's gone right up again.
Multiple retail chains, however, have suggested that the law has caused police to deprioritise shoplifting as a crime. And on several occasions, police have admitted that themselves, like here in 2023, and also here in 2017.
So what she said is pretty much true. She was just talking about de facto rather than de jure. Thank you for clarifying, I guess.
The problem is wider than just retail businesses feeling it hit their bottom line, though. Frontline staff are increasingly feeling the threat of violence when trying to intervene.
Oh yeah, there's definitely more of a boldness in shoplifters. Back, as I say again, when I was working in a supermarket, if anyone was caught shoplifting, they'd try and run away. These days, from obviously what we're hearing, even Novara Media are admitting it these days, there's a lot of people who are fighting back instead. And yeah, people are noticing, and they really don't like it.
Despite that risk, one Tory police boss thinks that it's the public's job to tackle these crimes. This was Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley, speaking earlier this week.
If you've got someone in your store now stealing from you, call 999. Also, ideally, try and stop them leaving. You know, don't just stand there and watch, which a lot of people do, which frustrates me.
Yeah, he's right. He's right. You can citizens arrest people. That is a legal right that every citizen has. If you have good reason to suspect that someone is shoplifting and taking alcohol from a store and leaving without paying for it is pretty suspicious, you have the legal right to apprehend them until the police arrive to officially arrest them. This, by the way, was what the old TARDIS police boxes from the 50s were about. They were there as police checkpoints, and random people could literally just throw criminals in there for the police to arrest, either on their checkpoints, or obviously there's a phone in there, usually to contact a police station, to let them know that there is a criminal in said police box. And I'm completely with this Tory minister. If you see someone shoplifting, it's well within your right to citizens arrest them, to apprehend them for committing a crime. I don't know why this is so strange to Novara Media. This was normal literally throughout history.
Barbara also said this: if you're not even going to challenge people, you're not going to try and stop them, then people will get away with it. That's not just about policing, that's a bigger problem with society. People who don't do anything. You're part of the problem.
Yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right. As a society, we keep devolving our responsibility to the government and its institutions. It's not just the police that should be policing behaviour and crimes. People should obviously be doing that too. Call it a snitching culture if you really want to, but ultimately it made Britain one of the safest places in the world. Not even a century ago, but decades ago. Oh, but we still had crime and riots. Yeah, obviously. It's comparative. There's nowhere in the world where you're going to have absolutely zero crime. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with what Mr. Barber has said here.
So what's fueling the rise, not only in shoplifting, but also it's increasingly done out in the open? This is from The Week magazine earlier this year.
She reads the whole thing, but she could just summarise it like I'm about to. Effectively, the Association of Convenience Stores has found that typically these shoplifters are repeat offenders, with one example in 2023 stealing £140,000 worth of goods in a year. And then in 2018, the Centre for Social Justice found that it was actually drug dependency that drives about 70% of the retail theft. But in recent years, there has also been a rise in organised gangs that are stealing goods too. So generally, it's just antisocial behaviour. And also, when it comes to recent organised gangs, just to be absolutely real with you, this is largely down to immigration. When it comes to the gang problem in Britain these days, a lot of it is simply down to immigration. You know, there was a poor girl who was shot in the head a few weeks ago because of ethnic gang warfare going on in London. I believe it was a Turkish gang that shot her, unfortunately. By accident, of course, but still is horrible. Oh, look at that, there's another part to this. Cost of living is blamed, things cost more, therefore people steal. I don't really buy that. Self-checkouts being put into stores more and more haven't helped, because it's really easy to, pretend to swipe something and put it in your bag, despite the weight check that's usually on these things. And of course, the lack of policing doesn't help either. So I have a prediction that the focus area is going to be on, oh, well, people are dependent on drugs, therefore we need social programs and probably youth hubs as well to help all these people. Well, let's give them a chance. I've not been unimpressed so far, I have to say.
So, with all that in mind, Curtis, are you up for being a supermarket vigilante?
Unsurprisingly, my answer is no. And I was reading into it, and some were saying you can offer £1 from some supermarkets were doing it as well.
Yeah, damn, that's a good deal. I mean, I have done it in the past actually for free. God knows what happened in the end, but I really hate thieves, even the petty ones. It's one of the 10 commandments for a reason. If you have theft common in your society, everyone just feels terrible. This is part of the reason everyone feels terrible and why everyone is making fun of Fraser Nelson for pretending it's not terrible.
I mean, there's so many things to sort of come at this. The first thing is to obviously address austerity and public expenditure cuts, right? And it's kind of strange that if you even got supermarkets, right, saying, you should intervene and encourage people to do so, we've kind of outsourced policing to the market. It's very neoliberalism.
It's kind of amazing how this is described as neoliberalism when this was entirely the norm throughout history before neoliberalism was even conceived as a concept. In fact, post-neoliberalism is actually when we had less citizens' arrest and actually less of a responsibility on the average person to effectively police others in society for crimes. But this is so typical of, well, frankly, both communists and woke writers, Mr. Lindsay calls them, just blame everything on neoliberalism regardless of how well it fits or not. Believe it or not, it's not neoliberal to say, well, actually, it kind of is neoliberal to say take personal responsibility. But, as I say, it was the norm even before neoliberalism was popularised under Thatcher and Reagan. Anyway, let's still see what he says.
I think what Commissioner Barber was saying was by the way, absolutely disgusting. It's look, for a lot of people, it's scary, right? People not get involved because they don't care. People are worried. Maybe that person does have a knife on them. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable. My response to that is, is knife crime up as well then? Is that another big issue that we have? Crazy, I heard that was another right-wing conspiracy theory 4 years ago.
But what's really frustrating is he's calling people idiots on the phone who are apparently part of the problem, when you've just read out in your segment that drug-fueled shoplifting is a major problem. Maybe the police should stop the war on drugs. Maybe we should look at drugs like adults and start addressing it as a health issue rather than a criminal issue.
Sorry, so your argument here is that because there are drug users who are addicted to the damn things, who are going out of their way to steal to, let's face it, fund their drug habit, your answer, I suspect, is to do what they tried in places like, I think it was Vancouver, and they certainly tried it in places like Canada. And effectively the answer seems to be, well, these drug addicts, just take them to hubs, let them conk their brains out on heroin, have, nurses and doctors there, whatever, making sure they don't overdose, and what seems to happen is you just get these state-funded opium dens. That seems to be what happens. Okay, you don't get people dying of overdoses, but it's hard to see that as anything other than a waste of money. The BBC actually had another article where it goes through the decriminalisation, it was Vancouver by the way, in British Columbia, over in Canada, but I wanted to get to this point. So the decriminalisation of drugs has inspired efforts in both British Columbia and in the US state of Oregon, which decriminalised drugs in 2020. But in all three places, including Portugal, the policy has faced pushback, and in Oregon, lawmakers voted in March to reverse it altogether after it was blamed for a rise in public disorder and drug use. Which is, still a problem. Guess what? This is part of the antisocial behaviour that people don't like from drug taking. In British Columbia, which has a history of harm reduction advocacy, the government's push to revise its decriminalisation policy was challenged in court over concerns it would lead to an increased risk of overdose fatality. So far, the courts have sided with that argument, an outcome that elicited a mixed reaction. For Mayor West, the court said they are out of touch with where the public is, because Mayor West had an altercation at his child's birthday party where a drug user who was taking it legally was in a park and obviously started an altercation at the child birthday party because he was up to his eyeballs on heroin or something. This focus on irreparable harm to a certain group ignores the harm that occurs to others by allowing rampant public drug use. But these sentiments have been countered by supporters of decriminalisation, like the province's ongoing chief coroner, who said there is no evidence to suggest that the general public is at risk from public drug use, aside from the mayor literally experiencing that. But this is the whole argument. Should you have a high overdose rate, or should you have people who are at risk of witnessing antisocial behaviour and a load of shoplifting? I don't know why that's the binary. Surely there's a secret third thing, which, for once I agree with Peter Hitchens, actually have a proper war on drugs rather than effectively make some of the drugs de facto legal, that word again. I mean, the stories I hear from everyone effectively saying that they smell cannabis everywhere, and some people even report it for nothing to happen. Yeah, people just don't seem to care. You know, I've walked past houses that absolutely stink to high heaven of people smoking weed because they're smoking it out in their front garden. This places that police patrol, by the way. There's no way they don't smell it, and they just ignore it. But anyway, no, why not just try and copy these places like Portugal, Oregon, and British Columbia, all three places where people clearly have some aversion to the way that it's all been handled.
All roads, to me, lead to neoliberalism and Thatcherism, right?
I wish we were getting some sort of neo-Thatcherism anywhere. We're not getting it from this Labour government, obviously. The road toward it definitely is under reform. They're going to take crime very seriously, at least that's what they're promising. And the whole damn thing's run by businessmen who have a decent understanding of the economy and what you can do, obviously, to help businesses run properly. This Labour government can't even cut the winter fuel allowance, which was supposed to be cut years ago because it was just supposed to be temporary because of high energy prices. It's ridiculous.
Over the last 45 years, we have seen a decimation of the public realm. And it's not just materially, by the way. Look, I do think there's maybe a cohort of people who are doing sort of gang-related shoplifting, almost organized shoplifting, where maybe not every single person is completely destitute.
Oh, again, this comes from my experience and what the statistics tend to show. Barely anyone who's shoplifting is destitute. Barely anyone shoplifts because they can't afford something and genuinely need the meal. That's why they love going on about the statistics of people skipping meals to buy other things. Hell, there's even been reports recently of people not buying hygiene products like shampoo so they can afford a couple of meals. I think generally, and I would take this as a white pill, I think generally, even with the cost of living crisis where it is, which, yes, is a cost of decadence crisis, fine, people are making choices rather than trying to have everything without paying for it. Shoplifting, generally, from what I can tell, is more just a thing that people who are already criminals do. And, well, as mentioned before, you get rid of, I don't know, 10% of shoplifters, you probably bring down shoplifting by 50%. It's that simple. And you don't consistently shoplift like that if you are trying to get a meal just before payday, are you? Come on.
But I would still blame neoliberalism because I think that the public realm being decimated means that people are feeling alienated.
Yeah, no, I'm going back to my cynical roots here. These are arguments that we've heard over and over and over again. You know, we had a more cohesive society before we had the highest taxes and highest state spending ever. The reason that the police haven't particularly felt the increase in spending is because an awful lot of it goes on social care and healthcare. That's basically what's making the majority of public spending, either through the NHS or obviously redistribution. It's not a funding problem. The government's the best funded it's literally ever been. The issue is where they're putting the resources, and it's just being put in ridiculous places like redistribution, which is not helping people.
And I think this toxic, poisonous ideology of individualism has really created that.
Britain has always had individualism. It does not mean that you can't have a cohesive society. You know what helps make a cohesive society? People getting together to actually citizens arrest criminals if the police aren't around. That was actually what massively helped us have a cohesive, collective society, if you want to put it in those terms. And my God, you're probably asking for the worst time for these types of people to get all collective when it comes to the Brits, because there is an awful lot of pro-immigration arguments that Novara Media make and still do make. And if you're getting any sort of collectivism in the British people at this point, when immigration has been sky high for years, it's not going to be in a way that they like. I can guarantee that.
We're creating a society where people don't trust other people anymore. And that is obviously, you know, as a Marxist, I blame a lot of that on material conditions.
Wow, no way. You're a Marxist working for Novara Media and you blame it on material conditions? No way. Again, material conditions have literally never been better in Britain. They've literally never been better despite cost of living and despite the complete stalling growth. You can thank that mainly to Chinese manufacturing of American goods that make it dead cheap for everyone. Having a massive housing crisis? Yeah, I get that's a problem, but let's be real, if you don't get a house, you just live with your parents longer.
But I do think there is a sense of, you know, not belonging anymore. You know, there seems to be disunity within the communities and communities wider across the nation.
Wow, no way. Could that be because our police force doesn't deal with this low level crime which puts people on edge, and they don't seem to be dealing with violent crime properly either? Could it also be to do with immigration, where people are moving to Britain in very large numbers and making their own enclaves to the point where you have signs in areas that just aren't in English? And that's a problem that isn't just dedicated to one street known as Chinatown in a couple of cities? Dunno. Could be something to do with that, couldn't it?
I mean, if you have politicians and the media, the political parties saying, you know, we do not have a society, right? All we need to care about is yourself and your friends and family, but the rest of society doesn't matter.
I mean, this is just a snide critique at the old Thatcher speech. There is no such thing as society yet again. Just missing the point of what she said, which was effectively you can't keep using the term society to try and excuse taking everyone's money to then misapply it from a centralised government. It's stupid. If you want to do charity, one, it starts from home, and two, it should be your responsibility to do that charity, not just to offload it to the government. Which is all the argument about citizens' arrest is about, by the way, but obviously it's not quite a social norm anymore, but I have no problem making it a social norm again.
So now compounds that with austerity, then of course you're going to get this. You're going to see a rise in crime. And of course, crime is largely down to poverty and obviously drug-related instances or people being dependent on drugs.
Sorry, but even from your own statistics that you brought up on Novara Media, that's not true. You can try and link drug abuse with poverty. I think something like 60% of people in poverty, I don't know if that's relative or absolute, are considered drug abusers, but there's so many drug abusers in the United Kingdom. The correlation isn't the strongest in the world, but if that is going to be your argument, you need better evidence to back that up.
Again, it's a health issue, not a criminal issue.
So he tried to put it on poverty, and then he puts all the emphasis on drug abuse. They say, oh, it's definitely a health issue. Be more like Portugal. No, I don't think I want to copy Portugal's ideas on how to deal with the drug issue by basically making it legal, actually. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea.
But when you absolutely decimate the public realm, this is what's going to happen.
Again, the government has literally never had more money. Literally never had more. You can blame austerity all you want, but austerity ended under Theresa May. She was elected in 2016. We've not had austerity for a decade. We certainly didn't have it. It certainly ended after COVID. We're 5 years out from that. What are you You can't keep blaming austerity here. That clearly is not the case.
Maybe also, in terms of social democratic argument, if we just stop cutting our public services in terms of policing numbers, maybe they can deal with the issue. But instead...
Yeah, you're probably right there. Unfortunately, redistribution and, of course, the NHS come first. Again, because Theresa May was like, oh, don't want to be seen as the nasty party. And so the NHS, again, especially after COVID, got all the money, and a load of it's being redistributed. It's absolutely crazy. We basically live in Novara Media's perfect world, and they hate it. Because drugs basically are decriminalised, especially if it's petty. Shoplifting, basically decriminalised. They'd probably be okay with that, but they're realising actually people hate it, and after all, they are trying to win votes for Corbyn's party. You know, these are people that during the George Floyd riots were tacitly in agreement with defund the police. Forward 5 years, all of a sudden, oh, actually it was the Tories' fault for austerity. Which, yeah, they did make cuts to policing, you're absolutely correct. Guess what's happened since? Government's had the most money ever, nothing's been fixed. Maybe they're just useless. And the police is one of the only things I think the government should be doing.
The police would rather spend the weekends locking up 500 people for holding placards for standing against the genocide, because they're the real criminals now.
Oh man, I've not covered that. Yeah, that was based. Like, clearly the police can actually arrest protesters. Why weren't they ever doing it with Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion? Crazy. Also, it wasn't just because they were standing up against genocide, it's because they were in support of a group that has attacked British military bases. Yeah, arrest them all. Even the blind guy and the priests. Arrest them. You are perfectly free to go out and protest the genocide. It was happening for 3 years to the point that Jewish people didn't feel safe going to London on Saturdays. Two idiots then go into RAF Bryce Norton, cause £1 million worth of damage to jet engines on our military assets. Yeah, of course they are going to be hard done by. And now people are just effectively trying to be edgy, saying, ooh, look at them arresting me for protesting the genocide. That's not what's happening. And you know that's not what's happening.
Obviously, that's a really good of resources. But ultimately and fundamentally, it is down to inequality and poverty. I mean, just to be anecdotal here for a second, when you go to the supermarket, look at how many things are behind security tags now. Like cheese. In my local Aldi, there's literal tags around cheese. There's meats, baby formula.
What does any of that have to do with poverty and inequality? The only reason for that is because shoplifting's gone up, and guess what? They've worked out, oh, a whole load of cheese is being nicked, steaks are being nicked, baby formula's being nicked, and obviously the assumption, the wrong assumption here by the way, is that, oh look, it's just people trying to feed their babies and feed their family. No, this is people stealing this relatively expensive stuff to then go to a pub in the next town over to sell it for half price, because the markup's 100%. Given that, well, maybe not quite 100%, I guess they'd have to pay for petrol, but even then, it's all done just for profiteering pretty much. And actually, if it's not for profiteering, it's for drugs. I do not buy this is a poverty and inequality problem. This is just the fact that the police don't bother turning up to shoplifters. Partially because they're stretched thin, and partially because it's much easier to get arrests from people to knock on the door and arrest them for tweets. Let's be real.
And you need to look at that and really reflect on where we are in society, right? A lot of crime and a lot of shoplifting is obviously down to the fact that the state and the economy doesn't adequately provide for your average person.
Oh, it's just total nonsense. Everyone has an iPad. Poverty in the modern world does not mean what poverty meant back in the 70s. We still had slums in the 70s. Hell, Edinburgh didn't even have cars. There were still milkmen delivering with horse and carts. As I say, we have literally never been in better material conditions. But the communists have lost, and so they have to be dishonest about this whole thing. Oh, look, it's just people trying to provide for themselves because they can't afford food. Nah, total nonsense. Again, I've seen it for myself that this isn't the case.
And politicians and the police are not interested in that. Not really. Because you have to fundamentally change society.
We've been fundamentally changing society into more of the way that you would like, rather than how the Thatcherites would like. Let's just make that very clear. Police got defunded, there's more redistribution than ever before, the state's bigger than ever before, taxes are higher than ever before, and here you are complaining about the results of basically the road that you wanted us to go down. Net zero as well, that's another one you really wanted. We're well on the way to that, destroying our country. Well done. This is why I'm not only just Tories to lend the rest, but the whole left wing needs to die as an entire political movement. We've tried their experiment for nigh on a century, apart from a 20-year blip at most after Thatcher was elected. We couldn't even keep trains privatised for more than 5 years, despite the fact it was the only time really people agree that trains improved, but there we go. Ideologues, not even once.
You have to fundamentally change the economy. And that might mean upsetting, I don't know, some of your corporate donors, because maybe you want to add a wealth tax so we can create a more equal society and redistribute wealth and power.
Okay, well, they're just leaving. They are literally just leaving. Where there's a wealth tax, that doesn't last long because people just end up leaving. Literally more mobile capital than ever, and your idea isn't to try and attract that mobile capital, but try and drive it away. Again, we live in that world, by the way. You got what you wanted, pretty much. And yet, they still vote Greens. Because the person that brought them their world wore a dark blue rosette.
And the result is far more reactionary policies. I mean, you've seen Reform and Nigel Farage in the last couple of weeks saying, we are a lawless country. Now, he's now got his next talking point. He's going to come down hard on crime.
Well, yeah, thank God for that. Weren't you just complaining about crime? Why would you not? Weren't you just complaining about police numbers? That's good.
Which I get confused by Reform. Either we're lawless or you get locked up for a tweet. So I'm not quite sure which one they're going to go with, but they throw a lot of shit and it sticks somewhere.
I mean, you just know you're winning in politics if your opponent is coming down to semantics. What do you think the two-tier care meme was? What do you think that was about? We're lawless in that the laws that people actually care about are not being enforced, whereas laws that people generally hate are being enforced and they're being overzealous with them. It's mad.
So they're happy to say we need to put more money in policing, even if they're not even really doing it. But they want to sound tough on crime. But, and not to sound like Tony Blair here, but he did say tough on the causes of crime too. We've kind of forgot even that first bit. We're just looking at the results from it.
Is he still talking about Nigel Farage here, or has he moved back to Starmer? Because it sounds like, it sounded like he's saying, Reform are happy to say that they'll put more money into policing, even though they're not really doing it. They're not in power. So are you talking about Labour now? I'm really confused.
But ultimately, if you look at the wider society, you have to change it radically.
Yeah, that's kind of the point of reform. They do want to radically change away from this ridiculous Blairite consensus we've had for 2 decades. It's really bad. Well, nearly 3 decades, actually.
And it's not a short answer. And unfortunately, one of our sort of ills of our political system is we vote in a general election every 5 years, and people sort of expect instant results.
I think people are actually a little bit more patient than that, personally. Thinking back to Thatcher, she was elected in for a good decade, and then after that there was another 7 years of Tory, so clearly not that bad. And how we had, even despite not great results from the Tories, we still kept voting for them. You know, they were in for 14 years, okay, sometimes with a coalition, but the whole reason people are getting really annoyed at Labour is that the things that they said they would do, they're not doing, and then they're randomly coming out with, yeah, we're going to cut winter fuel payments, which, you know, I agree was a good thing, but obviously it's political suicide. Main reason being because you have to cut down on the amount of illegal immigrants here, because everyone knows that billions is being put into that, and technically it's unlimited, but that doesn't take priority. That's why people hate Labour. They'd probably be alright with making further budget cuts if they need to, but ultimately people want the immigration issue sorted first, which they know is costing a lot of money, and so they're not willing to give up any benefits they may have from the state. And I get it. To be honest with you, I get it. You have to deal with the immigration issue first. Absolutely.
But if you've had 45 years of neoliberal economics and individualism, you can't fix that in 5 years. Now,
yeah, I was right to stay cynical. To think we've had neoliberal economics since the mid-2000s is just absolutely ridiculous. Certainly after 2008, we just don't have it. You do not have quantitative easing, and you do not bail out these failing banks under a neoliberal system. That is ridiculous.
This is not me defending Labour, by the way, because I think they've been awful within the year they've done already. They don't have the ideas, or they don't even want to change society radically.
Oh yeah, it's pretty clear that Labour have absolutely no ideas whatsoever. But in a way, thank God it's Labour in and not the Greens or Corbyn, I'll put it that way. Well, Corbyn's in, but he's not in government.
But obviously, media pundits do want sort of a quick answer, when really we need to be looking at 10, 15, 20 years of structural change, of dealing with inequality, of dealing with poverty.
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it all before. I'll skip to something interesting.
I think you're absolutely 100% correct. I could not have said it better myself, right? What's that? Like, the base informs the superstructure. Wow, if only someone had thought of such a thing many centuries ago at this point. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yes. We all love Marx. We all went to university, was told we need to love Marx and take him seriously, blah, blah, blah. What really this all comes down to is incentives. And frankly, if you live in a society that is largely permissive of petty shoplifting, you're going to see more petty shoplifting. We live in that society, and therefore we're seeing more of it. Therefore, be harder on it. As I said before, in fact the anecdote before, I should say, in BBC News article, it wasn't BBC News, Novara Media read it, but whatever. One guy stealing £140,000 worth of goods from supermarkets and retail theft. There's probably maybe 100 people out there who are like that, maybe not stealing quite as much, but certainly stealing into the tens of thousands. You just arrest those 100 people and put them in jail for a long time, boom, you've pretty much actually solved the issue. Like, you'll still have some petty crimes, but even those petty crimes, the people who steal one or two things, goes right down because they're now scared that they're going to get arrested. Wow, it's a deterrent. But all this airy-fairy Marxist nonsense of, oh, a compassionate society, that'll save things. Again, we redistribute more than ever before. We've literally never been more socialist. We live in your world. It's made things worse. Own it.
If you have a society where we fundamentally think that everyone should be acting in their own rational self-interest, right? Well, of course people are not going to care about anybody else. That's the selfishness.
It's obviously in your self-interest to keep society, if you want to put it that way, in a good and running state. That's obviously in your self-interest because basically nobody's an Ubermensch who can do everything by themselves. You need society to function, especially in the way it does now, because, well, it's how everyone lives. You know, this is the thing. Despite the fact that shoplifting is effectively de facto legal, really only 500,000 cases a year, and I would assume that's just from the police reports, it's probably higher than that, is actually probably quite low. Simply for the matter of fact that people do want to live in a civilised society, and how do you do that? Well, you don't steal. I think it largely comes down to people's own morals, and that should be quite a white pill, that the majority of people still have the morals of do not steal. But this whole ridiculous argument that, you know, neoliberalism is Ayn Rand's perfect world is just ridiculous. Neoliberals are fine with a social safety net. There was never a problem with that. Hell, a lot of neoliberals wanted negative income tax, where effectively it's a different way of doing minimum wage. A business puts out how much money they're willing to pay you, and then you can top up to whatever this wage is via government benefits, effectively. And that doesn't impede on the market too much. And on top of that, can help people who maybe aren't as lucky at the start of their careers to actually get jobs. It's way better than zero-hour contracts anyway. Why have they come about? Minimum wage laws. I'm going to talk about that until I die. I was working 60 hours a week for a year for like £14,000 or something because I had to work a part-time shop job while at the same time interning to learn to code so that I could get to where I am now in my career. I could have just done the internship for lower pay. I'd been happy with that, and I could have worked there longer. But no, we need minimum wage laws because we live in the socialist perfect world. It's not perfect, obviously, but we're certainly on the road to it.
The greed that was taught to be good as a kind of tenet of Thatcherism, right?
What government ever said greed is good? Such a meme about Thatcherism, honestly. Nobody knows what it means. It's just everything bad was Thatcher. No, actually, a lot of good things were from Thatcher. She wasn't perfect, fine, but come on. She was not Ayn Rand.
And fundamentally, a lot of people who engage in kind of petty crime have no stake in society. And that's the problem.
Yeah, you're kind of right about that. And that's why, frankly, I'd just put them in jail. You can actually do things yourself to get yourself into a place where you do actually have a stake in society. If you're not going to do that, fine, go to jail if you're committing crimes.
But the whole point of the state is to make sure people have that stake in society.
The state is bigger than it has ever been, and I don't think we've ever been more atomised as a society, I have to say. There's something wrong in your logic here.
The Thatcher argument, you should get rid of the state, give people property, and they'll have a property-owning democracy, and that will give them the stake in society.
Give them property? No. You're the one arguing to give people property. The Thatcherite argument is they earn their property and buy into it, and so you should make that as easy as possible. That, by the way, is how we know we don't live in a Thatcherite world, because it's basically impossible to buy property. I say as someone who bought their property 2 years ago.
But of course, that never worked because all of that got subsumed by the capitalist class.
I mean, this isn't even true either, by the way. You will always... This is an Americanism of the left in Britain, by the way. BlackRock and all that over in America, I don't know the details, but I know it's a problem that they keep bringing up, and so the left wing here have brought it up too. 94% of landlord property is owned by a private individual. 5% is owned by companies, so that's your Lloyd's Bank and things like that. Is that way too much? I have no idea. What I do know is that is a vast minority of... Well, this is just rented, by the way. This is rented property. Do you know how much of the household market this makes up, the private rented sector? It's about 20% of it. That means overall about 1%, something like that, of the entire housing market is gobbled up by this capitalist class, as they call it, because they don't mean necessarily private landlords, though they do hate them. They mean the BlackRock equivalent over in Britain, and yes, sure, they're expanding, but quite clearly the housing market isn't largely down to these conglomerate corporations. It's a mixture of immigration and not building enough. Obviously, sort the immigration problem out first. But anyway, back to our other point of, this clearly didn't work. Yeah, it did. Over the last 50 years since Thatcher got in, we've mostly had Tories being voted in over and over again. And when Labour have got in, you've said they're basically Tories, with people like Blair and Brown and Starmer. So actually, quite clearly, it did work, because Jeremy Corbyn didn't get in, and the Greens are only just about getting 4 MPs. And they've not had the meteoric rise in the poll like the Reform Party have they? Who are very much in the mindset of property-owning democracy. Thank God.
The rich people had much more leverage within the market, were able to subsume all of the kind of the property-owning democracy of the people who own the council houses, then they got sold to landlords. If you look at things like the stocks that were sold from the privatized industries, like the Don't Tell Sid stuff, that was all subsumed by people like private equity buying out people's stakes so they could afford to survive.
I've said this before when I've covered No Justice before. I literally do not have any anecdotes of anyone selling their house so that they could basically live. And if I do know people who have moved house, I have never heard of them selling it to some corporation or private equity firm. I've never heard of it. And as we looked into with the private rental market, makes up 1% of that. The private rental market 20% of the housing market as a whole. This may be an issue in America, I don't know. Certainly not an issue going by the statistics in Britain, though, is it?
And it's led to people who have no ownership of their own lives, no ownership of their own stuff, and no ownership of their own workplace. If we want to give people more of a stake in society and feel like the society is going to be there for them and vice versa, there has to be a new social contract.
Which is, yes, give everyone property and let everything be a co-op. Yes, I understand. You actually live in a world where you can set up co-ops and actually make them the most efficient and win them in the marketplace. You can actually do that. Are you doing that? No, you're going on to shows like this to complain about it, which I understand is part of the political process, don't get me wrong. But what I will point out is that Novara Media is a limited company, and it has one officer, who is Aaron Bastani. So again, if these people had principles, don't worry about it, they have others and they are mostly capitalist. I don't see the campaign to make Novara Media co-op owned, but well, there we go.
And for there to be a social contract in the first place, we have to ditch the ideology, as you rightly point out, that says that such a social contract cannot exist, which is why it's so ironic that people like Robert Jenrick, who does all these videos about the social contract and petty crime, have been part of the foundational ideology that caused that to happen in the first place.
Robert Jenrick was born in 82. Robert Jenrick's time in Parliament was from like 2014. This was after neoliberalism was ever going to look like it was going to make a comeback, because we had Blairism by that point. Robert Jenrick got in on an A-list and managed to become the most generic Tory ever, which from 2014 to 2020, and close to 2023 actually, was effectively, oh god, we can't be seen as a nasty party anymore, put up taxes and put up spending to the highest they've ever been so that we can pump all the money into the NHS and social care and redistribution, i.e. give us Novara Media's road to the perfect world. And then Robert Jenrick recently has either had a conversion or is being incredibly cynical, I actually lean to more of a genuine conversion, and has realised that actually he has been the cause of a whole load of massive problems which, by the way, Novara Media do not want to seem to tackle because they are still ideologically possessed into effectively going down the same road we've been going down for some time. They just want to stick their head in the sand about it. Anyway, that's pretty much all we have for you for today. They went through statistics, they saw causes, they saw criminal gangs was part of the issue, and then decided to stick to the drug thing because 70% of shoplifters are drug abusers. And they decided to correlate that with poverty, despite the fact the correlation is, while positive, not exactly strong. Also, it's the chicken and egg thing. Does drug abuse cause poverty, or does poverty cause drug abuse? I wouldn't know, and they didn't dare to look into it either because I don't think they'll like the answer. This whole argument was exactly what I was expecting, to be honest, but I just wanted to check in and see that they were still making the same arguments as 2020, and they are. So I don't think there's too much to worry about with this, as long as obviously Reform actually get in and fix all our issues. Anyway, I think with that we will end it there. So thank you very much for watching. Do of course subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment telling me what you think. Great way to help out the channel. You can also leave a super chat or super thanks in any video or stream that I do, and of course you can also become a member. As for shilling, there will be no streams next week. I'm having a week off as I am away. Well, away-ish. I will be quite busy and still trying to be making videos as and when I can. Might not be once a day, but we'll see. But you'll have a laughing at the Guardian tomorrow, so at least that should get you through the week. We will be back to normal scheduling back in September. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.